picture's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another book review. This one is of In Youth is Pleasure by Denton Welch, a 1945 British novel. Denton Welch was a disabled gay male who died only 3 years after this novel was published. This was published when he was 30, and this probably has instantaneously become one of my favorite British novels, one of my favorite pre-Stonewall gay novels, and a top read of 2018. So let me tell you a little bit about him and then a little bit about it, because I am passionate about this book. Denton Welch was born in 1915 and went to art school. Didn't get very far with his art career. There's a famous self-portrait of him, which I'll put up here. He did some illustrations for his later books. And then at the age of 20, he was on his bike, and he was severely injured in a car-bike accident, which did an immense amount of damage to his spine. He wasn't paralyzed, but he was in severe chronic pain for the rest of his life and had trouble walking, but did walk. Still rode a bike, but excruciating pain for the last decade and a bit of his life, and it foreshortened his life. So he never was able to really realize much of his sexuality, but he was, I guess, not openly gay, but certainly wrote in a very homoerotic style and did have a relationship. This is the first book I've read by him, and it has made me completely obsessed with Denton Welch. I want to read absolutely every word Denton Welch wrote. I think there's 2 more novels, a collection of short stories, and his journals. I actually have a copy of his journals, which I got in the late 80s. I hope it's in a box somewhere in Canada. I will probably buy it again. That's how much I want to read it. He is lauded and cited as a literary influence on such writers as Alan Bennett, William Burroughs, several others, but not widely read today. So I am sending a spell out through BookTube that you must try a Denton Welch book, if not this, one of his others. This book is about a 15-year-old boy named Orville Pym. Definitely an alter ego. All of Denton Welch's fiction was heavily autobiographical, and he is on a summer vacation in Surrey with his father, who works abroad, but he's come home for a little vacation, and there's 3 boys. Orville's the youngest. In one sense, not a lot happens, but that's completely off base. So much happens, but it's all these little bursts of narrative joy and sadness and ridiculous, preciously anarchic antics that Orville gets up to. He's left largely to his own devices. His parents and his brother don't seem to really mind that he goes off and spends most of the day on his own, and he gets into so much mischief. Things like breaking into an abandoned church, uncovering the brass image over top of an ancient grave and smooching with the image of the woman on the grave and trying to beam himself into the grave and become the corpse. And that's just on half of 1 page, and there's 5 more things that are equally as wonderfully startling in the next 3 pages, and that's the kind of book it is. The prose is really spare about the most bizarre and explosively energetic things that he gets up to or witnesses. There's a vibrancy to the way that he moves through the world. He's a screwed up kid. His mother had died a few years ago. There's a lot of grief. That's kind of the emotional undertone of the entire novel. He is obviously gay. There's nothing really explicit, but the way that he interacts with men and watches men is very different from the way that he does with women, and that's all very sensuous and again in a way that just kind of bursts off the page, and it's just wonderful. And he's also a collector of precious objects. He goes into an antique store maybe once, maybe twice, and buys these really weird things, and Denton Welch was very much of a collector of broken objects too, which I think is a kind of a metaphor for how he saw the beauty of his own life. I'm going to read a longer section, which is a flashback. He has a flashback to his mother. So in this scene, he's much younger. It's one of my favorite scenes in the novel. It's hard to choose. It really gives you a sense both of Denton Welch's prose and the character of Orville. I'm not sure exactly how old he was. He says it was years ago, so maybe he was 10. He was staying with his mother and a friend in a house by the sea in Devonshire. At supper one night, he said something insulting to his mother. She took no notice, but her friend left her chair and came over to Orville purposefully. She took her napkin and tied it securely over his face. "Oh, for shame," she said, mockingly melodramatic, but firm also, "that a boy should speak like that to his mother. He must be covered up. Nobody can look at a boy who treats his mother in that way." Outraged, humiliated, and frightened by this mummery, Orville jumped up from the table, tore the napkin off, and fled from the house, swearing never to come back. As he rushed past the dining room, the hard, gay laugh of his mother's friend floated out of the window. He hid himself in the lanes till late at night, now loitering under a hedge, now standing in the ditch and stinging his hand with nettles to see how much pain he could bear. He longed to go back, but was unable to humble himself. At last he dragged back to the lighted French window which looked onto the garden. His mother's friend had put on her favorite gramophone record of Chrysler playing Chanson Arabe. Orville hated the music, but it made him cry. He licked up his tears to savor and taste them. Then he dried his face carefully, slipped through the window, and sat down by his mother on the sofa. He could not say he was sorry. He could not even look at her, except for one darting moment. The friend turned to say something biting and satirical, but the atmosphere suddenly seemed to quell her. She went out of the room, leaving Chanson Arabe to whine to its end. Orville heard her getting ready for bed, and still he sat, quite still, with his mother on the sofa. They said nothing, not even when Orville stretched out his badly stung red hand and took the signet ring off his mother's little finger. He tied the ring in his hair, knotting two of his longest curls. Then he nodded his head up and down, so that the ring banged rhythmically on his forehead. He often played with the ring in this curious way. He loved to feel the soft tug and thump of the heavy little gold object tied in his hair. His mother got up and went to the store cupboard in the hall. She came back with a new square bottle of pickled gherkins. Silently, she placed two of the minute cucumbers on two beautiful little plates, which were all that remained of an old doll's dinner service. Orville and his mother sat down in front of the cucumbers, and ceremoniously, with the utmost delight, they started to eat them. I love that. And at the age of 15, Orville is still very much like that. He gets very emotional and flees the people that he's with and goes off on his own and acts out. And it's just fascinating to read and quintessentially adolescent, I think. I read an article, which I'll link in the show notes, by Alan Bennett, who said that much of what Welch wrote trembled on the brink of sex, and that is definitely true with this novel. There's so much eroticism, a couple scenes that come close to being overtly sexual, but there's a palpable, throbbing sexual energy to the way that Orville moves through the world and the way that so many of the people, mostly men, but some women, experience him. There's some very disturbing allusions to sexual abuse or intergenerational sex. And in the very first pages, he gets, I can't remember what it is, the influenza, or he gets something at his boarding school just before the term ends. And the nurse, the way she rubs him down under his, where he's wearing nothing but a towel, and she rubs his whole body with this lotion, and it's written in such a sexual way, like is she taking advantage of him? And similar but less obvious allusions to the way that his older brothers treat and fondle and cuddle with him, and there's just so much like that, never mind the way he experiences the world and the way that he looks at men and the way that he idolizes women in that kind of proto-gay way. There's just so much to delight in here and to puzzle over. I can't remember. What other novels have I read from the 1940s? I don't remember a one. I must have. I've pretty widely read in 20th century literature. But I was just shocked at all of the energies going on in this novel from 1945. Homoerotic, sexual, like I say, precociously anarchic. And it was just fascinating. And I was like, was he ahead of his time? I think he was. John Waters, the film director, includes this novel on his list of The 5 books you should read to live a happy life if something is basically the matter with you. And he writes, maybe there is no better novel in the world than Denton Welch's In Youth is Pleasure. Just holding it in my hands, so precious, so beyond gay, so deliciously subversive, is enough to make illiteracy a worse social crime than hunger. Well, he's obviously descending into hyperbole at the end of that statement, but otherwise I couldn't agree more. Denton Welch is as well known and widely read for his published journals as he is for his fiction. And in a December 1944 entry, he wrote, I wish that people should mention the tiny things of their lives that give them pleasure or fear or wonder. And pleasure, fear, and wonder are what animate Orville Pym as he clumsily, gorgeously, audaciously traipses his way through the pages of this novel, and I'm not sure that I'll ever be the same again after having read it. So, that's my review. Thanks for watching.